It's time for Apple Farm Chatter, your podcast for all things Apple Farm Service, the latest ag news, dealership events, and upcoming trends. Put on your work clothes. Apple Farm Chatter begins now.
Hello and welcome to Apple Farm Chatter. Kent Holmes here with our special guest from the Ohio State University, THE all capital, right?
Of course.
Yeah. Because if I don't say the, then we'll be in trouble because we can't get you mixed up with Ohio University, of course.
Yeah, if they had a forage agronomist, there might be more issues.
But I'm sitting across with Dr. Emma Matcham. And Emma, thanks so much for taking the time talking with us.
Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here.
And we wanted to reach out to you. So glad we're here because I guess we should start off with Emma. What is your title at the Ohio State University?
Yeah, I'm an assistant professor in the horticulture and crop science department and also an extension state specialist in forage agronomy. And that title reflects kind of the diversity of things that I get to do at Ohio State. I am able to advise master's and PhD students in the horticulture and crop science programs, which is a wonderful part of my job. I get to help them launch their careers, learn more about the research process. And then I also get to support farmers, agricultural professionals, county educators throughout the state in forage agronomy, which is one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, and we'll get to it, but I was just looking up at the different research that you've been a part of, that you've led, that you've cited into, and just it is all great things for all of our area farmers to benefit from. And it's one thing I've never been. We're at the Waterman Farm. Sorry, the Waterman Farm here. And I haven't been here before, but it's just so awesome to see. I'm looking out, you have a brand new building that is meant for a big greenhouse.
Yeah, the new controlled environment research area.
Yeah, the super high-tech greenhouse. And I saw hay fields coming in.
Yep.
I saw other crops, berries. You got, and I'm right now in the Center for Honey Lab, right?
Yeah, the Rothenbuehler Bee Lab.
Yes. And so there's I walked by and it's just a science lab it's just so cool to see all of this science going on, and it's 100% applicable to every farmer that's out there in Ohio. So it's just so cool to see all this research for something that's going to benefit all of us.
And my favorite part is, you probably noticed, I rode my bike over here today from my office. It's great that it's so close to our students. So it takes about 10 minutes to get here from the main buildings for our undergrad ag student classes. So they're right here. We can take them out to Waterman for labs pretty regularly. And it's great that we can serve farmers and we can help train the next generation of professionals as well.
Yeah, that's one thing when I mapped it, I was like, wait, here's Ohio State. Here is all of the big buildings and Columbus, and then here's suburbs, and there's this farm in the middle of it. It's so cool. So all of this research what's some of the research you've done on forage and hay? I mean, what's some of the memorable things that you've done on as far as research?
Yeah, so I started this position at OSU back in January. So I'm pretty new to this role. And before this, I was working at the University of Florida, where I was doing nutrient cycling agronomy extension. And that gave me a lot of experience in a huge range of cropping systems. So Florida has a very long growing season and a huge diversity of crops. I did a fair amount on heavy metal cycling in peanut fields and timing for harvest in soybean. But then I also did a lot on nitrogen, sulfur, and potassium management for silage corn, looking at how we can balance producing a high yield crop with also the protein development needed for a high quality silage corn. And then some establishment recommendations for our warm season grasses in Florida. So most hay in Florida is not irrigated, but Florida has these very deep sandy soils. So if the weather doesn't cooperate, establishing a new planting of a perennial grass can be really difficult, both because, plants need water to grow. They need water if they're being planted from seed, in order to imbibe water and release those cotyledons and start the growth process. Or if they're being vegetatively propagated, they need water as well. But then once the plants get a little bigger, and their root systems are starting to develop, they still need water in order to take up nutrients. So it's been helpful for me to learn more about nutrient cycling in such an extreme environment like Florida, where water is very, very prevalent sometimes. But you lose it so quickly through those deep sandy soils. You can't retain it for very long. And that's been helpful for me when I think about water stress, heat stress, and the timing of different management practices in Ohio production systems.
Yeah. What deja vu? You're there. And then you move back in time before, was it a 100 or 500 year record drought last year?
That's while I was house hunting. Everything I saw was dusty.
Dusty, yes. As you come back, we have 100 or 100 plus year historical drought last year. And now we have the wettest spring we've had. And I forgot to look before, but it's probably been at least 10, 15 years since we've had a spring this much moisture over the period. We've had rainier seasons, but this to go on this long. So it's almost like deja vu. You come back and now you have to deal with severe weather, rain, and drought again.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Yep.
So I know that's one thing I want to talk about a little bit is about weather. And for those that are listening who have forage out there specifically, hey, what's going to be best for you the way this weather seems to be playing out. But before we do that, I have a quick game for you.
Oh, no.
I did not tell you about this. I'm sorry about that. But I do have a quick game for you. We're going to test how well you know your scientific forage names.
Oh, horribly.
Okay,
I look them up every single
It's
time.
time for our favorite game show. Is it Latin or is it garbage? Listen carefully for these two Latin phrases. One is Latin for a type of grass or legume. The other is garbage. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
It's time for Is it Latin or is it garbage?
All right, I got my cheat sheet here. So, as it said, one is the actual Latin name for forage of grass. The other is absolute garbage. Here's your first two. I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong. Dactylus glomerata or Photitum pedes. Do you need this repeated?
Sure.
Okay, is it gonna help? Dactylus glomerata or Photitum pedes. Which one is the grass or the legume?
I feel like the genus is realistic on one and the species is realistic on another.
You know, saying that we're speaking Greek to a lot of us.
You know what? Let's go with option 2. Why not?
Photitum pedes is actually stinky feet.
Oh, cool.
No, the first one was orchard grass, Dactylus glomerata.
You know, it was the glomerata that's...
That threw you off?
Yeah.
All right. Here's the next one. Ready?
Yeah. My college roommate would be so disappointed if she was a Latin major.
Well, don't let her listen to this. The next one is Cassium philium or Medaco sativa.
Oh, it's the second one. That one's alfalfa, right?
Yay! I didn't have to play the music. You're right. Yes, the Medicago. I should have practiced sativa alfalfa. The other one is string cheese, Cassium philium. So if you're in conversation and you see string cheese and you need to order it, you can say that now.
If I also get in a time machine first?
Yeah, you got a time machine. Yeah, maybe they're offering string cheese at Latin Mass. Next up is Hordeum vulgare or Pinguia papyrus. Papyrus.
I think it's the first one.
The first one, Hordeum vulgare.
I think so.
Is that your final answer?
The music is so dramatic. Sure.
Okay, that is correct. that one is barley. The other one, Pinguia papyrus, also if you're in an Italian restaurant and you're ordering in Latin, is greasy pepperoni.
You know, I hope the Pope knows that one. I think he might need it for his pizza order.
I would assume he speaks Latin. He speaks his Latin pretty well. Last one, are you ready?
As
Okay.
ready as I will be.
Okay, I think this one's pretty easy. I'll play the music.
Oh no.
Okay, makes it more serious. Mundus brachus or Trifolium repens.
Trifolium repens.
You are correct. The other one, that is white clover, Trifolium repens, white clover. Amundus brachus is soil pants.
All right.
So there you go. Hey,
I don't need that one.
You only missed one out of 3. Yeah. Oh, thank you for playing the game of if it's Latin or if it's garbage. All right, back to some serious stuff here. So this weather, we've gotten so much rain. People have always wondering when they should cut, when they should bale. Have you been studying the weather? What have you seen?
It's wet out. I mean, I think anybody who has been in Ohio the last couple weeks has noticed that, you know, you're wearing your waterproof shoes more often than not. You're packing a raincoat. And it's humid. So even when it's not raining, it's not necessarily great weather for drying this year. Different parts of the state have had similar weather to different degrees. So there are parts of the state that are a whole lot wetter than others. I'm not familiar with any parts of the state that have had just lovely springtime conditions this year. I could be wrong. But it is, it's been a wet spring.
So with all this rain, is it doing anything to, when it rains this much, the nutrients of these crops? Does it change it at all?
Yes.
Okay.
The biggest issue that we have when we have this much rain is our ability to get in and harvest crops because their nutrients change with different growth stages. And if we are delayed in harvest and we get into reproductive growth and haven't been able to get into the field, that is when we start to see the biggest declines in nutrient value of our forage crops, kind of across species. So if we get into full bloom with some of our legumes, we're going to have lower digestibility there. If we get into our heading and into more of our reproductive growth cycles on some of our grasses, we're going to see a lot lower protein and lower digestible nutrients overall. So there's that trade-off. You know, we haven't been able to get into the fields, so there's a whole lot of biomass out there, but a little bit less to digest. Animals are going to need to eat more of it in order to get the same amount of energy out.
Sure. Is there anything that farmers can do to kind of delay that in any way or to kind of combat that if they can't get into the fields? So they've already started to head.
Yeah, great question. There, a lot of the things that you could do are tough to do once these conditions start to occur. We have a lot of places in Ohio that you can't really drive into a field entrance right now without getting stuck. So at this point, there's not as much that you can do. And really, if you are not sure about the quality of the forage you're making, the most consistent recommendation there is test, make sure you know the nutrient value of that forage, and then supplement where you need to. We want to make sure that animals are getting the energy they need to grow and be successful. But we might not be able to do that with just the crops that we're harvesting if we're getting in too late.
Okay.
One of the other things that can really happen when we have consistent wet weather like this, especially because some of our rainfall came in a really short period of time. We have folks that were getting 5 inches of rain at once, sometimes even more. And we have a lot of folks that were getting, 2-inch rain events twice in the same week. In those conditions, we see a lot more nitrate and sulfate leaching. And those two nutrients, nitrogen and sulfur, they're critical for the development of protein in plants. So when we have leaching rain events, especially when they occur back to back, that can reduce the protein level in our forage crops, especially our grasses. But also, water is necessary to convert some of the organic portions of the organic nitrogen and organic sulfur portion of some of our other nutrient sources. So if you have a field that you applied manure to last year when it was really dry out, some of the nitrogen and sulfur was actually sitting in a plant unavailable form. And this water may have helped with the conversion of those nutrients into a more plant available form.
Okay.
So not all fields are going to have the same reduction in nitrogen and sulfur. because different fields are going to experience different amounts of rainfall and also had a different nutrient management history going into this weather pattern.
Okay. And I guess follow-up question. So let's pray and hope that it dries up. We can actually go out there and we can start baling. We get a cut. We just move on to the next one. From your studies, is there a good time after it's been cut? How well do these plants, can we have nutrients absorb them? Is there a certain time of the year when it's going to be best for plants to absorb nutrients or to reapply? I know a lot of folks that might farm, if they just have a couple acres here or there of hay, they might not do a whole lot of prep to it as far as nutrients and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend to them after it dries out and we have that first cut and they can have a kind of a restart?
Yeah, so great questions. If you are unsure of the nutrient status of your fields, I would really recommend taking a soil test before you make application decisions. Also, you can take a tissue test to determine if your plants are uptaking enough of our various macronutrients, especially, and some of the micronutrients as well. As long as you don't have ponding and other issues that impact root development, once the water is starting to get off your field, plants have the ability to take up nutrients from their root systems. So as long as their root systems are able to recover from the amount of water that you had, they will be able to bounce back going into that second cut of hay. But, take a soil test to determine if you need to apply more nutrients, and then do so if you need to.
Okay. Okay. And one question we always get when we get this much rain and it's wet, what have you done a research or what's your thoughts on people maybe that have always done dry hay and they're looking at maybe switching to baleage?
This year, I have gotten so many calls about folks.
I bet you have. Should I switch to baleage this year?
Yeah, asking, do you know anybody who is doing contract for wet wrap? What are my options there? I do think that given trends in Ohio weather, especially for this early season for hay, that this spring is unfortunately not going to be an anomaly moving forward. We're going to see more and more wet springs, and I do expect more people to switch towards wet hay. We're actually starting a new production budget, an enterprise budget for planning purposes at Ohio State. This is led by Barry Ward and some other folks at the OSU Farm Business Management team. And that should incorporate some more information about pricing for some of those baleage options as well.
Yeah, because that's one thing is it always comes down to, I've always done dry. Learning about the benefits of baleage, wet hay, from your research nutritionally between the two, what do you see difference-wise? What's the strengths and weaknesses of whether you have dry hay or whether you have baleage?
I'm not super well versed in the nutritional differences between the two. When I think about the differences from, a forage production standpoint, I'm really thinking more about the timeline of making that product. And with dry hay, you need such a large window of rainfall-free weather. And it can be so sensitive to some of the environmental factors like wind. Today's the first day in a while that we've had a decent breeze in Columbus. And when the air is really stagnant, even if it's sunny out, things don't dry very well. Temperature, wind speed, ground moisture, those are all factors when we think about trying to make dry hay and make it quickly. And we see such a large loss in dry matter and nutrients when cut hay is rained on. So being able to use a system like haylage where you need a shorter window after the crop is cut before you can get it off the field can just reduce some of the risk. Especially, I don't know if you've experienced this year further west in Ohio than I am. In this part of Ohio and then south and east of us, this year we've had a lot of spotty rainstorms. It feels more like the pop-ups that I'd experienced in Florida, where we don't see these large systems that just drench the whole county. We see half a field getting a bunch of rain. Mm-hmm. And that just makes it really hard for planning purposes. So I like that some of our options other than dry hay allow us to use a smaller window of fit working conditions. Yeah. Anytime you get rain on hay that's already been chopped,
what do you do? I guess that's the next question. What? Because you probably get that call. It rained. What can I save this? What can I do? How can I make the best of it?
I think such a stereotypical extension agronomist answer. It depends. It depends a lot on how much rain, how dense the material on the ground was. Is it already windrowed? Is it spread evenly?
I guess you can give us what's the worst case and what's the best case. If I'm out there and I'm looking at my windrows that are out there, what would be the optimistic, pessimistic? What's the worst and best scenario?
Yeah. So best case scenario, anytime you get more than a quarter inch of rain, you're going to start to lose at least some nutrients.
Okay.
In that scenario, your soluble sugars are the first thing to leach out.
Okay.
Your protein can also leach. That means that the part of your forage crop that is most resistant to losses under even small amounts of rain is actually the less digestible portion.
Okay.
So that can be really challenging. You want to make sure that if you think your hay got rained on, you're taking a forage test later on so that you know how much energy is in that crop before you're feeding it. It can also affect when you get to some of the higher rainfall scenarios.
And I guess to interject, because you mentioned getting a test. What's the best way they could do that? Because hay's on the ground. I want to get a test, but I also need to get it off the ground, but it's still wet. Should you still bale it when it dries and then get it tested, or what should you do?
You want to test it closer to when you're going to feed it.
Okay.
Yeah. So go ahead, let it dry.
Okay.
And then
bale it.
Yeah, use your hay probe.
Okay, put it in the barn, get it tested then.
Yep.
Okay.
But make sure that you know which bales it was.
Yeah, mark them.
Yep.
Edible paint is your best friend.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah.
But you definitely want to know which bales were affected.
Okay.
And then test that lot.
Yeah.
In order to know how much this did affect you.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, you can lose up to 40% of your dry matter from rainfall on cut hay.
40%.
40%. Those are numbers coming out of Wisconsin. And that's from a combination of that leaching that I mentioned, but also I think about it like when you run a receipt through your pocket in the washing machine twice and it starts to fall apart.
That's a good analogy.
Whenever hay gets wet and dry multiple times, the first thing you lose is the more tender part of the leaf. That papery leaf, whether it's a legume or a grass, those more tender leaf blades on a grass, those start to shatter, just like a piece of paper that's spent through the washing machine and the dryer a couple times.
Okay.
You're losing the ability to harvest that dry matter after it's been wet and dry a few times. And if it gets a truly soaking rain, you get a whole inch of rain on a cut hayfield, it takes a long time to dry. And that's when we're going to start to see those larger dry matter losses and that higher amount of leaching.
Question for you that you probably get. My hay is wet. Should I go ahead and ted it or let it dry as it sits? What's going to give me more damage?
I think tedding hay is an important tool, but you want to make sure that that your machinery is well adjusted.
So you're saying maybe not go as fast or go faster, spread it out more? Because I could see people looking at it and saying, well, I don't want to rip it up while it's wet, but...
I think it also depends a little bit on how wet it is.
Okay.
If it's super saturated, it can be hard to get it to spread out nicely. But also how wet it was going into that first cut. Because a lot of times when we have forages that are very wet before we chop them, they have a higher ash content because we get a little bit of lodging in there and we have a hard time actually cutting. And then if we go ahead, knock the microphone. And then if we go ahead and ted after that, tedding can also increase ash content. Okay. So you just want to be careful, and you do want to, again, mark those bales, take a test. Right. To know what that ash content was. Okay. Which is at least nice now, where most balers do it, New Holland balers that we sell, case balers. You can have them where it has a kit that has a certain moisture content. It'll actually automatically spray paint that bale with an edible paint. Yeah, new stuff that's out there. So fancy. That way as you're going through, you can say, well, I want to mark all my bales at this content, and it'll mark it. So that way when you go back and picking up bales, hey, I'm going to pick this one up and put it specifically on this side of the trailer, this trailer. Let's get these last, so you know. But so, yeah, that's one thing. But it all comes down to is when you have your help. When your help come out and help you, right? That is a huge... Yeah, if I could predict the weather and had labor on demand, not necessarily unlimited access to labor, but labor that had schedules that matched my needs perfectly, I'd be way more successful. Well, we might have a new product for you that is in development. From the makers of some tech firm out in Silicon Valley, we partnered up and we presented the AI farming assistant. It might help you out. AI can do amazing things. And so here is our new program for you.
Man, I just don't know how I'm going to get this field stacked in time, especially with those high school students I always hire.
Hi there, I'm AI Steve, your helpful farmhand.
What? Who? What?
I'm AI Steve, using the power of AI to help you around the farm.
That's great. Okay, let's go. Steve, I need you to stand behind the chute and stack bales today.
Christian Bale is a famous English actor known for his versatility and physical transformations for roles. Would you like to watch The Dark Knight or other similar movies?
Huh? No. AI Steve, just catch the bale and make sure you stack it in the second row, perpendicular to the first.
According to my information, staggering them in alternating directions, starting with the bottom layer stacked on its side with the cut end facing up, is the most efficient.
Right, perpendicular.
According to my information, staggering them in...
Well, enough chat. Let's go. Rain is supposed to come tonight.
There is a 75% chance of a pop-up rain shower in 45 minutes.
Just stack the hay!
According to my information, staggering them in alternating directions...
Stop that! Just stack hay!
The old idiom, needle in a haystack, refers to something that is nearly impossible to find because it's concealed.
Presenting AI Steve, a new, powerful AI tool that won't replace the hard-working hands of your children, grandchildren, or anyone else who loves spending the heat of the day stacking hay from sunup to sundown.
For the love of Pete, just stack bales!
We're working out the bugs on AI Steve. He's got a little bit of time to go on that one, but we'll get there. One day we'll get there.
Job security for all of us.
Job security. I think that's what it comes down to is technology does a lot and it's helpful. At the end of the day, nothing is more dependable than if you can have a good farmhand, right? Yep. Or a good grandson or kid to help you bale. Hey.
We had a group text during the early days of the pandemic when labor was quite limited on a lot of research farms. And the entire theme of the text chat was problems we could solve if we were allowed to have an undergrad with a rake. So undergrad students weren't allowed to work that summer.
It's a rite of passage, right? For anyone who grew up on the farm or in an ag community, is when you're about 14 up to when you're out of high school every summer, you got to stack bales, right? Yep. Just what you got to do. But I guess labor is one thing, which is always a question when it comes to economics of hay and forage. From what you see, I guess, what do you have any predictions on kind of the economics of what you see out there for hay and forage? Anything that we should be looking towards?
So hay markets are super locally specific. As somebody that just moved back to Ohio a few months ago, I don't really have a whole lot to add to that right now. I was talking to colleagues, a lot of folks around us fed more hay this winter than they do a lot of years because they had to take animals off of pasture earlier in fall due to the drought. So a lot of folks that usually go into spring and summer with some reserves of hay to get through summer slump don't. They really need this first cutting of hay. So I do think that could have some economic implications. If I could predict that,
I know.
I wouldn't be doing this job.
You're right. That is so true, right? We were working at the Chicago Board of Trade. One thing forage, but in all across farming right now, is trying to find ways to it's always been about making the most with the least amount of inputs or money. Do you have any recommendations for specifically hay and forage? How can we get the most out of the least we put into it? Or what should we put into it that's going to be that's worth it?
Yeah. That wasn't on my prep list, man.
I am so sorry.
This is a much harder question.
Yeah. You mentioned nutrients, and is there anything? Gosh, fertilizer a couple of years ago, and still now is just ridiculous. And you hear it a lot with when it comes to corn and soybeans, but same thing with if you need to put something out on your hayfield. What's the best thing to do?
Yeah. I think the first thing is being really careful about not losing nutrients that you are creating on your farm. So having a really good manure management plan. And if you are feeding hay, reducing those hay losses as much as you can, or at least making sure that you can capture and recycle those nutrients. Animals are not going to eat 100% of what you put in front of them. So make sure that you have a plan to get some of that residue back into your fields. We don't want that going on our front lawn. We don't want that going in the dumpster. There is a fair amount of nutrition for the soil, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients in the hay, and we want to improve that cycling process when we can. That can reduce our fertilizer need longer term. And then being smart about managing our pH so that more of the nutrients that are in our soil are crop available. So when our pH gets too low, plants have a harder time taking up nutrients like phosphorus. And when our pH gets above, a 7.2, 7.3, we have a really hard time with plants taking up some of the micronutrients. When your pH gets below around a 6, that's when we start having issues with our legumes nodulating.
Okay.
So for folks that are concerned about nitrogen prices for 2026, start this fall making a plan for frost seeding legumes.
Okay.
Your frost seeding window can be kind of narrow in some winters. If we don't have a lot of snow cover, if we don't have a lot of freeze thaw action in February and March, then you'll have wanted to have planned earlier for frost seeding.
Okay.
So start making your plan for frost seeding in November, December. Okay. Make sure you have your seed in hand in January to get clovers out. Once you get above around 30% legumes by dry mass in your hayfield, you actually don't see a yield increase in Ohio when you apply nitrogen fertilizer.
Okay.
So frost seed those legumes.
And then you can save on your nitrogen that way.
Then you can save on
your
nitrogen.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
But again, it's all about prevention. Unfortunately, I don't have quick fixes for really anything in agronomy.
Yeah, and another question that comes up too is always the debate. Do I take, when I go into late fall, do I take that last cut to have something? Or do I keep it to help establish for next year? That's always a question, right? What's your thoughts on that?
If I could predict fall weather, I'd have an answer for you.
Okay, I guess what would be the pros and cons? What's the pros of not cutting at the very end of fall when you have a short?
Yeah.
cut.
As soon as you get below the growing point, so if you're cutting too low, no matter when you're making that cut, you're going to have trouble with regrowth.
Okay.
So if you're going to make that last cut, make sure you leave a little more than you think you need.
Okay.
We don't want to damage the lower nodes on our grasses, and we don't want to damage the crown on our alfalfa.
Okay.
The other thing I would say is if it's a stand that you know you might only have one more good year in, personally, I might take another cutting, because if I do end up having a very quick freeze after that cut and don't have much regrowth going into winter, it's less of a concern. It's, the trade-off is a little lower.
Yeah, that cost and the risk and the reward.
Yeah.
Might be better to get that extra cut if you were considering replanting anyway.
Right.
Okay.
If the stand looks great, we want to keep it for a while. Maybe don't choose that field.
Yeah. Or cut a little higher than normal.
Yeah.
Make sure you cut high enough. Okay.
Yeah. So the importance of leaving some growth going into winter has a couple aspects. One is we want the roots to have the energy that they need to survive winter. When the days get shorter and temperatures start to fall, physiologically, the plants start moving more of their nutrients out of their leaves and stems and into the roots. And that's important because that becomes an energy reserve that fuels those first few leaves emerging in spring. Plants photosynthesize to get their energy. And if they don't have enough reserves to start putting out that first leaf or two, then they have a hard time starting photosynthesis.
Yeah.
So we want plants to have enough carbohydrates and other nutrients in order to start that spring growth. And that happens in fall. The other aspect of leaving a little bit more residue in order to prevent winter damage is actually related to the physics of freeze and thaw. When we have more plant material, especially if it's grasses and legumes together, the freeze and thaw dynamics at the soil surface become a little bit more gentle, because when more of the soil surface is visible and more exposed to sunlight and to wind, we end up having a lot of freeze-thaw behavior because the dark color of the soil is going to absorb more of the sun's rays on that really random, sunny, gorgeous February one day that we always have in Ohio.
Right.
And when we have a mix of legumes in there, that can, because legumes have a different shaped leaf, that can help prevent some of that issue. And when we just have a little bit more biomass out there, having more biomass can also help with keeping some of the snow cover, preventing it from blowing away, which helps reflect more of the sunlight, prevents some of these really rapid temperature changes. And snow cover going into extreme colds, if we have a polar vortex weather pattern again, having snow cover and anything we can do to keep that snow on our plants helps prevent desiccation damage.
Okay.
Which is how extreme cold tends to kill plants.
Okay. I mean, that totally all makes sense. And I guess switching over to some technology that can help, because I mentioned that we have bale wrappers. New Holland has one that marks on the way out. A big thing that we saw a lot of crop saver, a lot of people coming back for crop saver, that propionic acid. I don't know if anything that you have to mention to that from if you've done any studies on it. We've seen even the pickiest of horses still eating when we use it. Have you done much research with that?
So I've not personally done research on hay preservatives, but I've gotten a lot of questions about them. I've been calling colleagues in neighboring states. We have a wonderful network of extension forage agronomists across the U.S. And crop saver is a little different because it is buffered. So the pH of crop saver as a product is a little different than some of the other propionic acids out there. I have not done work with that personally. But one of the notes I wanted to make on hay preservatives generally is that you have to be pretty accurate with your yield estimate and your moisture percentage estimate.
Correct.
Because you want to be able to apply the right rate for the tonnage of forage that you're producing.
Right.
And you really want to get that product out there evenly. So calibrate your equipment. Any type of preservative isn't going to work well if it is applied in a spotty pattern. We want that leaf area to be well covered. And when we are using any type of machinery in suboptimal field conditions, there's a tendency for all of us to rush. I don't know if you've had that.
No, never. We've never done.
Do you see that rain cloud over there?
Let's go bump it up another 2 miles an hour. Yeah, no.
I would never.
Never.
That's when we run into issues. So when folks think that they have applied a preservative in an even pattern, and then they take their bales and they put them in the barn, that's when we run into issues. Because if it's not even, it's not doing its job, and then those bales will still have a lot of microbial activity and can overheat and cause fires. So I really recommend that folks check for plugs in their nozzles frequently. And then I always like, whenever I'm applying something that needs to go out very evenly in order for it to be effective, I like to visually estimate where in the field I'm going to be when I need to refill. I know that sounds like such a small thing, but especially when we have multiple operators on the same farm, someone's just going to go until the tank runs dry.
Right.
That's where you run into issues, because if the tank never runs dry, yeah, you're moving really fast, but you don't have the preservative on there that you think you do.
Right.
So make sure that you know when you're going to need to refill your tank next, so that you know that enough went out there, and that you're communicating that with the other folks on your operation. One of the worst calls I've gotten is when folks think that they put a preservative out and it didn't actually get onto the crop the right way. So just, be careful, keep your eye on the tank, make sure that things are applying the way you think they are.
Right. And that goes right along with what I was going to. So for example, New Holland case balers that you can get with crop saver kits. They have sensors that will sense when the crop goes over it to get the exact idea of how much moisture by putting a small electrical charge from one end to the other of the slug, to see how much water there is. It's creating electricity. It's conductive for electricity. So it's getting the moisture, but then it's also getting, how many pounds are going in. And it's by doing that, it's creating a variable rate.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, you can get two different options. You can get one that has a solid rate, and you can get a kit that has a variable rate. Yeah. The variable rate is definitely by far more popular, because it's going, like you said, your question of what if you slow down? What if you speed up? What if you hit a thicker slug or thinner slug? Is going to make those adjustments on the fly to make sure it's even as it goes in. But like you're saying, you still have to calibrate it. You know, it's shooting out of the nozzle at the rate it's supposed to. But if that nozzle isn't clean or regularly cleaned, then it might not be, So like you said,
I've never, ever had issues with dirt getting in my nozzles, ever.
So yes, the technology is out there for that. You just have to make sure that you do, that it is checked. But
yeah, the technology is great. It's the users that sometimes we have issues with.
And that's just something, check your manual, make sure you call the dealership and make sure everything's going well. And at the end of the day, also check, well, if my monitor says my average of all of the application was this many gallons for this many acres, let's count the bales. Is it accurate? Yep, we're good. So
yeah, some of that's just, being careful, common sense goes a long way.
Yeah. Now, I think we got one surprise for you.
I already had a surprise quiz.
No, you have one more surprise.
I passed my surprise quiz.
You got one more question to ask.
Okay.
We want to thank you, Dr. Emma Matcham, for being our guest on this special episode of Apple Farm Chatter. For being such a good sport, we're going to give you a super duper awesome special spectacular prize. This super duper awesome special spectacular prize, or SDASPP for short, can be yours if you can answer this question. Are you ready for your question?
Yes.
Okay. Here's your question for your SDASPP. Why couldn't the flower ride its bike to school? Hurry, you have 5 seconds.
Because I didn't have legs.
The correct answer is the flower couldn't ride its bike to school because she lost her pedals. Thank you for being our guest. Your super duper awesome special spectacular prize, or SDASBP, is a random piece of twine. That's right. It's a gently used 3-foot strand of extra twine. Use it to tie something together. Let birds use it for a nest. Let your dog eat it for a special trip to the vet. Or even get it stuck in your mower deck. It's something you didn't even know you needed. It's a random piece of twine.
Ooh. You're right. You never know when you need that, though, right?
I was going to say, like, when you need that, that's the only thing that does the job.
All right. I mean, You got duct tape. And honestly, I think twine is the second best to duct tape. Sometimes it's interchangeable, depending on the situation.
Just depending on the situation. I'm a big zip tie person myself.
But if you don't have a zip tie,
The
you get twine.
Or the duct tape in some situations.
Yes. But thank you so much for the time today, Dr. Emma.
It was so nice to meet you.
Yeah. And before we bid farewell, is there anything you want to let our audience of those who are about to go out and hopefully make a cut if we get sun for more than a day? Anything else you want to leave them with?
Just be careful out there. We want everybody to be safe and, have a great harvest.
Well, thank you. Our guest today, Dr. Emma Matcham with The Ohio State University. For more information, if they want to learn about maybe your studies or about the program here at Ohio State University, The Ohio State University, how can they find out?
Forages.osu.edu.
Awesome. And then, of course, you want to learn more about Apple Farm Service, the locations we have, the equipment we have. And to find out more about us, you can go to applefarmservice.com. You can check out this episode and some of our other content on Facebook, on TikTok, on YouTube, and anywhere else that you search Apple Farm Service. So from the wonderful The Ohio State University, what was the name of the lab again?
Waterman Farm.
Waterman Farm, specifically at the
Bueller Bee Lab.
The Bee Lab. We bid you farewell on this episode of Apple Farm Chatter. Happy farming.
Thank you for listening to Apple Farm Chatter. If you haven't, subscribe today. Want more from Apple Farm Service? Like us on Facebook, follow us on TikTok, and check out our website, applefarmservice.com. Happy farming from your friends at Apple Farm Service and Apple Farm Chatter.